Good afternoon, my name is Sally Berkery and I'm the Managing Director of CEW UK. I'm really delighted to welcome this afternoon Yasmin Kate Patterson for the first episode in a series of sessions looking at well-being, stress, mental health and anxiety. With a career spanning 20 years in the beauty industry, Yasmin Kate is an expert developmental coach who specialises in mental health training, coaching and supports businesses on how to implement a well-being strategy. We'll begin the journey today to understand what mental health is and isn't, the language we use in our daily lives around mental health and how this either builds or breaks down stigma. We'll also take a look at why this is so important for business and how you can incorporate these learnings to make positive changes in your own businesses. Please do ask questions via the Q&A panel at the bottom, and we will certainly try and get to these at the end. But for now, I'm going to hand over to you, Yasmin Kate.
Hello, everybody. And Sally, thank you so much for such a lovely introduction and such a warm welcome. I also want to say thank you very much to Carrie and Gillian and the rest of the CEW team for making this mini-series a possibility. And it's a subject that's actually really, really close to my heart, both personally and professionally. And professionally, particularly because it is what I do within my consultancy. I support businesses implement wellbeing strategies, and also I'm a mental health first aid England instructor, and I coach and train other people to be mental health first aiders, as well as running mental health awareness training and personal one-to-one development coaching. Now, at this time, particularly with the pandemic, we know that mental health is something that for a lot of people is a real concern and a real issue. And I know that there are, research shows us that 1 in 4 adults actually struggles with their mental health in the UK. Now, very interestingly, Mind, the charity partner who are very much about mental health and well-being, have actually reported that during the pandemic, it's showing that 60% of adults in the UK are actually struggling with their mental health and mental well-being. And the Office of National Statistics, who report all the statistics within the UK, have very recently released their figures around anxiety. And the figures around anxiety have actually more than doubled cases during the pandemic. The last time they reported, there were actually 8.2 million people in the UK struggling with anxiety, and that now has gone up to over 19 million. So that's actually nearly a third of our total population in the UK. Now, NHS England particularly looks and has launched their strategy 11 years ago now, which is called No Health Without Mental Health. And that's because there's quite a disconnect between physical health and well-being and mental health and well-being. Now, recently I've asked the question a lot to people, and I've asked the question of what is health and well-being to you? What does it mean? And the answer that I have got is feeling well physically. Now, I think that's quite an interesting reply because there's 2 things in there that I find quite interesting. First of all, it's feeling well. So that's actually quite a positive spin on what we're looking at. But the second thing is it mentions physically only. The next question that I've asked is, if health for you is keeping well physically, what do you do to do that? How do you look after your health and well-being? Now, the answers are probably no surprise to you at all. So it's looking after your diet, eating clean and healthy, reducing the amount of sugar that you have. That's one challenge that I know I have personally. I do like a bar of chocolate. Taking regular exercise, keeping fit, making sure you're getting enough fresh air, getting outside, looking after yourself, taking supplements, reducing your alcohol intake, and those will be no surprise to you. Now, interestingly, very few people actually, when they talk about health and well-being, do they actually talk about physical and mental health as a holistic entity. And the very point of the government launch of No Health Without Mental Health was for us to look at our health in a holistic way. NHS England recognises that without looking after our mental and our physical health equally, we actually have no health at all. Now, the word well-being comes up, and it's a word that came up when Sally did the introduction. And it's a word that actually has caused quite a lot of debate, because the term itself, well-being, actually, it sits outside the medical model of health. So for that reason, its presence, or the lack of presence, of well-being isn't actually a medical diagnosis, but it's very much in our language. It's very much a term that we use when we're talking to people and we're talking about ourselves. The World Health Organization, if you look up what is their definition of health, they actually class their definition of health as a general state of physical, mental and emotional well-being. So it is a common term. It's a common term that carries a lot of importance. And we know that when we look at it, the term itself, if you think about it, talks about well-being and not ill-being. So automatically, it's a term that is really important in our lives. Now, we know that the things that we do to look after our physical health also have a positive impact on our mental health. And vice versa to that, we know that if we are struggling with our mental well-being, that can actually have an impact on our physical health. You know, for example, conditions like irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, the Blanchard study in 2001 actually proved that stress had a direct impact on IBS and was one of the main triggers for it. We know that asthma can be stimulated by stress. And back in the 90s, actually, it was Robbins in his study that proved migraine headaches, that the biggest contribution there actually comes from stress. So if we think about what mental health is and isn't, and Sally mentioned that earlier on, how do we actually describe mental health? Well, the definition of mental health is our psychological, our emotional, and our social well-being. So there's that word again, well-being. It is about how we think, it's about how we feel, and how we behave. Ultimately, it's actually part of our holistic health. So if I asked most people, rather than saying what is health to you or what does health mean to you, if I ask the question of what is mental health or what does mental health mean to you, quite often we get quite a different response. Many people say, well, it's when somebody's feeling stressed, it's if somebody's suffering with anxiety, or somebody's having a breakdown, or even possibly even less negative terms, and terms that carry much more negative connotations within our language. And this is why there is stigma around mental health. Even after a decade, you know, even after the decade of the government launching No Health Without Mental Health, and all the good things that have come with that, and all the focus we see in the press and the media about the importance of mental health, there is still a huge amount of stigma around how we talk and think and feel about it. And it very much comes in the language that we use. Now, if you do any mental health awareness training, or if you make the decision that you want to be a mental health first aider to support people either personally or professionally, one of the big things that talked about is something called the mental health continuum. And the mental health continuum talks about the medical language that is used. The medical terminology is on one axis, which is on the horizontal axis. And then it also looks at the social language, the day-to-day language that we use, which is on the vertical axis. Now, every single one of us has mental health, and every single one of us has a different positioning on that axis. We may have a medical health diagnosis or not. So you may be at one end of the axis with no mental health diagnosis and no concerns with your mental health, or you may be on the other end of the scale where there may be a medical diagnosis of a mental health illness or poor mental health. Now, wherever you are on that line, all of us have good days and we all have tougher days. We all have days where we jump out of bed, we feel great, we're upbeat, we're on top form, we feel good about ourselves, we feel good about the world around us. And then we also have those days where we might wake up and we feel what is called a little bit below the line. Those are the days where the alarm goes off in the morning, and I think we've all been there, and we hit the snooze button first time, and then we might hit it again and again, and we actually might hit that snooze button repeatedly, because the reality is we actually don't want to get out of bed and we don't want to face the world, because those are the days where we're having tougher days with our mental well-being. Now, if you think about children, not necessarily teenagers, but if you think about children, they generally wake up, they're full of life, they're full of energy, particularly at a weekend when you want to sleep in and have a rest and have a lie in, and they bounce out of bed and they're full of beans and they want to do things, and they've got this great passion and energy for life. Now, think about those days that if you have children, they wake up and maybe they don't feel like that. They don't exude that energy that they do on a normal day, and they might be a little bit quiet. And what I want you to think about now is how you talk to them and the language in which you use. You know, you would ask them, are you feeling okay today? Or are you having a quiet day? A very good friend of mine, they have a term in their household that if she notices that her girls aren't quite on their usual top form, she'll say to them, are you having a bit of a winky wonky day today? Now, that's not a term we can use with adults, or we would use with adults, but what I'm saying here is the language that we use when we talk to children is far more kind and compassionate, maybe, than when we talk to ourselves or talk to our peers. So if you saw that a child was having a tough day and they were a little bit down, think about the things that you would do. You'd put on the favourite TV show, you'd probably sit and watch a cartoon with them, maybe play their favourite music, you'd spend time with them, and you'd connect with them. You'd connect with them in a way that is kind, that is caring, and that is compassionate. How we talk to ourselves when we're having a bad day quite often is very, very different. And also, if we notice maybe one of our peers is having a bad day, we may not even broach the subject with them at all. But if it was a friend, again, we'd probably talk to them in a way as we would do with children. We'd ask them if they're all right. Do they want to talk about it? We'd encourage them and say, well, you know, a problem shared is a problem halved, and talk to me. Within that conversation, they don't necessarily want you to fix anything. They don't want the answers, but what they want to know is that you're there, that you are listening, that they feel important and heard. And after talking, quite often they feel better just by getting something off their chest. So if you see one of your peers potentially in the same way, why would we not do the same thing with them? And that's because of stigma. It's because we feel uncomfortable about having these conversations. We generally feel that if I shared something with you about how I'm feeling, about my mental health, I may be concerned about how you view me. And in reverse, it might be the other way around, that how would I view you if you shared something similar? And that's where that stigma builds, and that stigma actually comes from. A question that's come through is, how do we recognise in employees, particularly in business, because a lot of you that are on the call today are here in business and in HR and have teams, how do we recognise that if somebody in our teams or within the business is actually struggling with their mental health? And what signs are we looking for? Well, the signs quite often to start with are really subtle. They're not something that's greatly obvious. It might be that their general appearance starts to change. You know, if somebody normally wears a really bright lipstick to work, if it's one of your female colleagues, they may not be wearing the same level of makeup, they may be looking tired, their level of grooming might have changed slightly, their attendance might change. You know, you might notice a shift in their timekeeping. They're not in the mornings as they would normally be, bright as a button. You might find that things are being missed in work, basic things that they wouldn't normally miss because they're usually so switched on and on the game. There might be a change in their conduct. just these small, subtle changes are quite often missed. And this is when we need to spot them, because otherwise it can go into deeper issues. There may be performance issues, there may be accidents in work, particularly if they're working in a retail environment. They may not be paying enough care and attention to their own health and safety, or those of others around them. And sadly, what happens is, in quite often, is if these are not spotted early enough and the conversations aren't had, these issues can then be dealt with as performance management issues and treated accordingly to that. Now, earlier this year, before we went into lockdown, I was working very, very closely physically with a company who have rewritten completely their health and well-being strategy for the whole business. And one thing that they have done, which was really smart, is it has become a complete holistic strategy. It's physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being that they've focused on. They've taken it from top down and bottom up, and everybody within the organisation knows the importance and the focus on health and well-being, that being physical health as well as mental health. They have mental health first aiders throughout the business. It's not just owned by HR. And every single person within the organisation has had mental health awareness training. The impact of that has been huge for them, because people's understanding of mental well-being and potentially poor mental health has changed. The way they're having their conversations has changed. So stigma has dropped and conversations have actually opened up. And people have actually felt more comfortable to share what the real core issues are affecting their performance. And where they may have had a number of cases that were sitting with HR as HR issues and performance management cases, those cases actually dropped off the radar because they got the team the right support and signposted them in the right way. So that's a really positive way of viewing mental health and well-being, when actually it's a full 360 holistic business shift. Well, what is happening in the workplace at the moment? There's been some great reports that have come out this year from Deloitte, from Benenden, and one very, very recently in September that's specifically looking at health and well-being and mental well-being during the pandemic. And that has been fascinating. It's a fascinating report to read, because what it looks at is it's studied with over 1,000 recipients. It's interviewed employers and employees, and it's looked at where the main challenges are around mental health in the workplace right now in this current climate. And one of the questions that they asked was, in general, what do you think the main causes for mental well-being deterioration in the workplace are? And the replies will be no surprise to you. The main reply has been around increased workload. That's over 40% of people have said that that has had a direct impact on their mental well-being. Financial concerns, you know, a lot of people have gone into furlough this year and therefore have had their salaries, their income reduced as a result. And then job security and workplace culture. So those were the general things. But then they asked, saying specifically during COVID, what is causing the most stress at work for you during this pandemic? And actually what came up was quite interesting. Over 25% of people said they were concerned around losing their job, because if the business is going to shut, what happens to my job? Will I be laid off? That is massive. But what for me has been really interesting is, and I think it would be a greater percentage if they just had interviewed the retail sector, is over a third of people are concerned about returning to work and being in the workplace for their own health and safety, and how they're protected during the pandemic physically from the virus. And that's huge. Just think about the population of people that we have in our industries and stores. We have area managers and training managers going into stores to see teams, but we have the teams, those beauty advisors that face the general public every single day and try to do their job to the best of their ability. And if they're concerned about their well-being and their welfare, we need to ensure that they've got an environment where they can talk to somebody about that, whether it's their line managers, whether it's their colleagues and their peers, or more confidentially. The other area that was quite interesting that people are concerned about specifically during the pandemic are those people that are working from home. They're concerned that they can't turn off. You know, all of a sudden, their dining rooms have become their office. If they're in a house share, their bedroom or their kitchen has become their office, and they're an enclosed space that at the end of the day, where does the line between work time and personal home time start and finish? So these are real tangible concerns. And sadly, because of the stigma that we know that we have and that's there, it's actually stopping the conversations happening between employees and managers and bosses and employers. And 1 in 3 employees have actually said that they are uncomfortable talking about their mental health at work and why they're stressed in work. But during the pandemic, 6 in 10 people have actually said that their mental health has taken a decline due to work-related worries. But only a third of bosses and employers actually think that this is the case, or that there's any concerns in the workplace of their teams around mental health. So there we can actually see the disparity between the reality of what the staff and the employees are thinking and the view of the business. But in fairness to the business, if those conversations are not happening, there's never going to be a seamless, cohesive conversation that has the ability to tackle these issues. Now, big reasons why they're concerned about talking about their mental health at work. The biggest one, the top one came up, is they're concerned that their employers, that people or their peers won't think they're able to do the job. I can't talk about it because what if they think as a result of how stressed I am or how anxious I'm feeling, I can't do my job? What does that mean for me? What if they treat me differently? What if they don't offer the help and they withdraw from me? The other big one that came up is, what if it impacts on my career progression? What if I can't do my job, I'm perceived as not being able to do my job, and it impacts on my career progression. So therefore, I stay quiet. When it comes to reporting, if we have to have a day off because of our mental health, what's really interesting is over 53% of people who take a day off due to mental ill health or a deterioration in their mental well-being don't report it as that. They actually report it as a physical sickness, quite often headaches or tummy upsets, or they take it as an emergency holiday day. Now that then brings, as you can imagine, a layer of complexities. It brings a layer of complexities, particularly for employers, because if they don't fully understand the issues and they don't fully understand why people are taking time off work, when it comes to adapting their well-being policies and their strategies, they can't support their teams properly. It's one of those great sayings, you know, if you don't tell me, I don't know. I don't know what the issue is if you don't talk to me about it. If it's not reported properly, how can they be fully equipped to help their workforce? The other thing that came out in the study actually is that nearly half of employees know that their workplace has a wellbeing policy, but they don't feel it's a priority, or they say that it isn't taken seriously, or there isn't even one in place. And that's a challenge for employers, because 70% of employers are concerned about mental health and well-being. They want to put it at the forefront of their policy. They want to get it right in the business, and they want to do the right things to support their people holistically in physical, mental, and emotional well-being. Now, obviously, there's a financial impact on the business due to sickness, regardless of what that sickness is from. But Deloitte, in their latest report, their 2020 report, they actually looked at the impact of sickness and business costs specifically around mental ill health. And what they found was that in the UK, it costs businesses a year £1,300 per employee for mental health related sickness. And actually, if you add all of that, when it comes to a total UK picture, it's 45 billion a year. And last time it was looked at, it was about 36 billion. So it's gone up exponentially. And that's only from recorded mental health sickness. So just think about all those people. If we know that a third of the UK population alone is suffering with anxiety, and that's just one mental health condition, what the real impact on business is on a financial level. Now, I've got a question that's popped up in the Q&A, so let me just have a little look at that. Okay, so what does this mean to bosses in day-to-day terms is one of the questions that comes in. Well, if people are off sick, what that means is, A, you have an employee off on long-term sick, so they're not active within the business. So what else does that mean in terms of impact? Well, either they might need to take on temporary staffing to cover that person not being there, or that role goes uncovered. And if that role then goes uncovered, that workload actually goes on to other people in the team. So what that then does, as we talked about earlier on, it increases everybody's workload and puts additional pressure on everybody else within the business unit. So you're sharing out the workforce, or you're having to take temporary staff. You might have your key players out of business because they're struggling. The workforce then becomes more disengaged, and there's no real clarity on how a business can then move forward with good working practices. But there is some good news, because we do know from the Deloitte report that 58% of businesses really have mental health as a big priority, and they have proven that for every £1 spent on mental health interventions within the business, that the company gets that back in reduced absenteeism, staff turnover, and presenteeism. So with increased awareness, with the right support structures in place, we can reduce the impact on business as an impact on everybody who remains in the business and still there, for those people that are struggling with their mental health and their well-being, but also on terms of business costs at the same time. Now, I've just had a couple more questions that have popped in here. So I'm going to click answer live on this one. So hopefully that will pop up for you. So if I wanted to talk to somebody and check and see if they're okay, how do I do this and be supportive? Right, well, there's a couple of different ways in which you can do this, and one of them that I'm going to talk to you about is from the Mental Health First Aid England website. So the resource is there if you want to have a little look at it, and we can put it in the resource kit later on for people to share. And that's called Take 10 Together. So if you think there is somebody in your team or one of your peers or colleagues, or even, you know, one of your line managers who you just don't think is all right at the moment, you make the time to take 10 minutes together. And what's important about that is you really take 10 minutes with that person. You choose the right setting. You don't do it at your desk. You don't do it at their desk, where you might have email notifications popping up and distracting you. You get rid of the cursed mobile phone, because, you know, the reality is, you know, there's nothing worse than having that mobile phone pinging and buzzing when you're trying to talk to somebody, because you get distracted. And if you're distracted, you're not really connecting with them. Keep the chat positive. Ask questions that allow people to open up and converse. Really listen to them. Think about where you are. Think about your body language. Is your body language open, or are you sitting uncomfortably or cold or screwed up or in an uncomfortable way? Because that really does make a difference. If your body language is open, you are empathetic and you listen, people realize that you're taking them seriously. You know, ask them questions. You know, how are you feeling at the moment is a good question. And it's better than, hey, how are you? How are you feeling right now? Because, you know, or how are you today? Because that's one of those questions actually that we ask automatically. It gets an automatic response of, yeah, I'm fine, thank you, great, how are you? And it closes down conversation. So how are you feeling at the moment? How are you feeling today? It's live and it's real. how long have you felt like this? If you're struggling, how long have you been feeling in this way? Talk to me, tell me a bit more. Do you have anybody that you can go to that you feel can support you, or that you can talk to outside of a work environment? And then, another really important one is, can I do anything to help? Outside of this sort of 10 minutes that we've got now, is there anything that I can do to help you on an ongoing basis? Or is there somebody in work that you can talk to as well? So there's just a few small tips. Now we've got a couple more questions that have come in. Another one that I'm going to answer is, right, so you shared that every pound spent by employees on mental health interventions, they get £5 back. What's the best way to do this to build a better culture so our teams don't think it's a tick box exercise? And that's a really hot topic at the minute, because when we hear people saying, well, yeah, there's a mental health policy, but it's a bit of a tick box exercise. Okay, so what can you do? I think one of the first big things is, and one of the great learns with the organisation that I was working with earlier this year, where they really got it right, is they reviewed their wellbeing policy so that they are holistic in terms of physical, mental and social wellbeing. It's that full 360 is really, really important. If you can offer, or you have an employee assistance program, make sure that it's available to everybody. Make sure people know what the telephone number of that helpline is. Make sure that they know it's free and that it's confidential, and that it's available to everybody in the business, whether that's people that are based in an office environment, people that are working from home, that might be working out in the field, and even in the department stores, because they are holistically 100% of your workforce, and therefore every single one of them needs that access to that support of an employee assistance program. It's really important they know it's confidential as well, so that they do feel like that they can talk to somebody and open up. Have you got wellbeing referrals in place that are free? Do you have a HR library where people can access resources? They know where to look for them, and that they can go in and get them whenever they want, because they might not want to come to HR to actually ask the question of where they can get the resources. So is it everything easily and clearly signposted? Have mental health first aiders within your business. Mental Health First Aid England says that to actually really break down stigma and make a change in organisations, we need to have 1 in 10 people in businesses trained as mental health first aiders. So what does that mean in real terms for your organisation and your business? What does that look like? And it really does, any wellbeing policy needs to be a holistic support. It can't just be owned by HR. It has to be owned by everybody in the business structure, from top down and bottom up, as we said earlier on, because for it to be taken seriously, the key players need to be across the board at all levels. And if it's something that you want to discuss further, what that could look like for your organisation, do get in touch with me. I'm happy to take a sidebar conversation and look at that for you. And see where I can support and I can help you if that's possible. We've had a couple more questions come in. One is, I'm going to answer this one live. What role do mental health first aiders play in the business? Well, they are there, and that's a great question. They're there as a support for the people within the business. The idea isn't that they have a constant stream of people coming to the door or coming to the desk and talking to them because they're not counsellors. They are there to support, they're there to listen. They're trained on how to deal with any mental first aid crisis that they might see in front of them at that particular time. But also they are critical in signposting. If you come on any mental health first aid training, you leave with a huge manual and resource kit. And in the back of that, there is an A to Z index of every possible different signposting you need for any mental health condition, or for anybody that might need support with their mental well-being, so that they can signpost people in the right way, and hopefully give that person an ear to start with and have the confidence to talk, but also to point them in the right direction. We've had a few more questions come in. Right, this is going to be my last question, because I'm also just really, really conscious of time as well before I pass to the CEW team. So a question has come on, as a self-employed person running their own business, what are the best things we can do on a daily basis to keep our mental health in good place? Worry over work and retaining clients means that we don't, or often can't, take time out. Yes, that is a very, very real concern for people who either run their own business and have people who are relying upon them, or they are self-employed, so therefore they are their only point of generating revenue and income. And there are lots of different things that you can do. Over the next 2 weeks, interestingly, we've got 2 more webinars, one based on stress and stress management. So that might be a really useful webinar for you to log into and have a little look at. So I don't want to give too much away from that one. And the week after, we're actually going to look at anxiety and how we can support ourselves around anxiety. When you think about things on a daily basis, what I would say to you is, look at your time planning and your time management so that you can take breaks throughout the day for yourself. When you're looking at your diary, schedule time slots in to make sure that you are eating right and you're walking away from your laptop or your computer so that you're getting a proper break from screen time, because we're often bombarded with so much information and noise and news and emails that you can feel those stress and those anxiety levels build. Make sure that you get outside and get fresh air. Interestingly, in Japan, they are massive on social prescribing, and they're really far ahead of us in terms of different questions and how to look after your mental health. But they actually socially prescribe something called forest bathing, because what they say is if you get out into nature and spend a proper amount of time outside in nature, that really cleanses and calms the soul and has a positive impact on your health and well-being. Look at your support network around you. Who are those people that you can talk to, that if you need to pick up the phone and have a conversation with somebody just to talk about how you're feeling, have that list of people that are there in your back pocket, as I would say, to support you through when times are tough and things are difficult. And there are many of us who are working for ourselves or consultants, and that's why something like CEW is such a great network of people that you can call on or you can talk to, that we can support each other in different ways. As much as I am a mental health first aid instructor, obviously I trained as a mental health first aider first. So if you do want to reach out and talk to me in a confidential way, I'm more than happy to have conversations with people as well. So I think that's probably the last question that we've got time to take today. So thank you very much for all the questions that came in. I really appreciate that. And at this point, I'm going to pass back to Sally and the team as a thank you, first of all, for everybody that's dialed in today, and also a thank you to them. And I'm going to pass back to Sally to close up. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Yasmin, Kate, for your expertise and the huge amount of time spent on creating this session for CEW. I personally found it invaluable. It's such a challenging time for all of us. And I've certainly had, as you say, winky wonky days over the past few months. And definitely this awareness of both mental and physical health has never, ever been more important than it is right now. And I suspect as we go through the winter, things are going to get a little bit more challenging. I'm really delighted to say that we'll be welcoming Yasmin Kate back again next Thursday for part 2 in this series, and I really hope you'll be able to join us. We'll be sending information out to the membership tomorrow about this. And as I say in the newsletter each week, you're probably fed up of me saying it. If you have any suggestions for speakers or topics or feedback you'd find useful, please get in touch. CEW is about you, the members, and we love to hear from you. Either myself, Sally at cewuk.co.uk, or the general email info@cewuk.co.uk. You can find all of our details on our website. But for now, have a great evening. Thank you very much, YKP, and we will see you all very soon.